from Ron Burgundy. You guys ever watched that Anchorman?
Of course.
Oh my god, I fucking
Oh,
love
yeah.
that movie. I love Anchorman. Anchorman is probably my favorite comedy movie ever.
It's good stuff.
It
Oh wow, we're
is
live.
Yeah, we are
great.
live.
I thought there was
We
going to be some
always
sort
be
of
live.
intro animation or something.
Yeah,
like that.
no intro today. I changed it.
Fanfare.
Because the other-
Just Ron Burgundy.
Yeah, the other time we used like my generic intro, which was kind of weird because it's the one I used like before I give the news. So people must have been
Oh,
confused,
yeah.
like what the fuck is going on. So I decided to take it out at this time.
That makes sense.
I read this sentence this week that is like, under vigilance capitalism, we are all cam girls. So here we are.
Yes.
That's great. How are you holding up down there with looks like Claudia Sheinbaum really manages to get along with Trump in a way that our guy who's on his way out can't, eh? He likes her. She must be talking sweet nothings into his ear or something. I don't know how she's doing it over there.
Hooray for
Really?
Claudia.
Because I thought he just put the tariffs on now this week.
No, he did, but then he just lifted them on Mexico, but not Canada.
Yeah, not Canada.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, actually, the tariffs on Mexico are going to be withheld until the 2nd of April. So
Yeah.
Claudia bought us a month of non-tariffs. But let's see. Actually, what I suggest we do, since we are all here now, is that first I would really, really like to repeat a similar exercise of what we did with Victor last time, because like most of the comments I get from the people that are starting to follow the show and listen to the podcast is that they're probably more familiar with me and with Pills, since we spent a lot of time in front of the camera, but not as much with you guys, with Eric and Victor. Last time, since if anyone is just joining right now, we did an episode focused a little bit on Victor and his story and how he started with philosophy, his fields of interest, and a little bit about his background. And I would like to do something similar with Eric today. And this very, very short series that we're calling Getting to Know the Pill Guys is going to have a very abrupt and sudden finish after this session. And then what we can do on the second half of the show is that we can discuss a little bit current events, because I think there's a lot of very, very interesting things to discuss. And maybe some of the angles that we're going to discuss in the first half can be useful in the second half. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Sounds good to me.
Excellent.
So having said that, and to everyone that is joining, welcome everyone to the Pillpod. I don't know which episode is this. I think it's around 202, 203, something like that.
In that
Maybe.
area.
Something like that.
If you haven't heard us about before, you can join the channel. There's a YouTube channel dedicated to the Pillpod podcast. We are also on Spotify and most social medias. And also, I'm going to leave here in the first comment the Patreon link so you guys can join and support the project. It's a project that has been going on for almost 200 episodes, and I have the pleasure to be joining the team since the beginning of this year. And I hope I can add as much value as I've been getting as a fan from you guys in the past few years. So today, focusing on Eric, and since this is a philosophy podcast, even if Pills can disagree with the statement in his
Philosophy is
latest,
over.
yeah, in his latest positions,
Or what it is.
yeah, and it's strange to say that a lot of people that follows the Pillpod and listen to us either are major in philosophy, studying philosophy, or tempted by philosophy. And I think these conversations are especially useful to people that are either confused or seduced by the notion of philosophy. And starting there, Eric, not necessarily a personal story, but for you, when was it that you decided you were going to study or dedicate yourself to studying philosophy?
Oh God. Philosophy. Well, I did my undergrad more in like culture and literature. So philosophy just kind of snuck in there. I never made like a conscious decision where like I am going to study philosophy. I was always more like I have trouble committing to a single discipline, so I wanted to do something kind of interdisciplinary, but at the same time that left the options open. So I'm like, well, literature is perfect, right? You can approach it philosophically. It is also philosophical at its best. And then it leaves room for other ways of exploring it too, like historical perspectives, for instance, and then you can bring in like Marxism or psychological perspectives, and then you can bring in Freud. Like I just would like to keep my options kind of open. So there was never a moment where I was like, I think I want to study philosophy. It just kind of rolled in my study of literature, I guess. Yeah.
You know, it's interesting. One of my best friends, which is a philosopher from Spain, he actually made an argument once that philosophy, it's a type of writing. It's a way of writing, as in a way of thinking. So do you ever, Eric, and maybe Victor can add his opinion here too, like how important is it for philosophy to be studied in tandem with, for example, in Victor's case, is in tandem with politics, and in your case, it was with literature. Like, did it became like you found it necessary to study philosophy in order to go deeper in literature, or how did that process like led to each other in a way?
Yeah, sometimes it is like very literal. Like one of the first books I read that I knew, okay, if I went on to more schooling, I could deal with reading and studying literature. Cheesy enough, it was The Great Gatsby. And The Great Gatsby, near the end, there's a reference to, Jay Gatsby's Platonic conception of himself. So that suddenly sends you off. Well, what the heck? What's Plato all about? And then you got to go look at the allegory of the cave and things like that. So there's like direct connection. Like if you want to know what the heck Nick Carraway meant by describing Jay Gatsby that way, you'd have to go look at Plato and philosophy. That's kind of like the direct route. And then the other route is that, literature is just very philosophical in itself too. Like another book I really enjoyed reading was Nabokov's Lolita, because despite its challenging content, it meditates on like time and immortality and like the role of art, as well as truth and lying and things like that. So literature has lots of overlaps with just the territory that philosophy covers as well. So yeah, it's just a couple examples, but
yeah, it's interesting. Yeah. I know like I'm sometimes a bit jealous of Eric's. Like, I know he has like this raw talent for just like reading literature, but also you once told me, Eric, that you also had like a mathematical aptitude, which is another thing like that I definitely didn't have.
Oh, really?
And I found that really interesting when you told me that. I don't know. Sorry if I'm just like blowing up a personal fact about you live on air here, but like that always interested me. Like my experience was so different where like I just like didn't like doing any of my homework, as I said before on the other episode, including like reading dense novels. Like I just didn't have it. I didn't have it in me to do that, and I definitely didn't have it in me to do fucking math. And it's like you seem to have both of those aptitudes, and they just kind of pulled you in different directions. I don't know if you want to talk about that.
Yeah, no, the math thing was just more like me saying I could have done that if I really tried. It's like something I was like, I definitely had an aptitude for it, but I never developed it. And then when I encountered logic in university too, I was pretty good with it. And I'm like, oh, this is like mathematical logic.
With concepts, yeah.
Same kind of thinking. Same kind of direction. Plus I was good at statistics too, but again, those are just things that I never pursued. And now I'm going back and trying to be like, oh shit, where I should learn a bit more about these things. Where could I have been if I did learn these things? But yeah, no, there weren't. I want
to comment on that. Good. I want to comment on that relationship between mathematics and philosophy, which I think is interesting to understand, Eric. But first, for the people asking, yes, we are live. I can put questions on the screen. So if you guys want to leave any questions in English for any of the three of us, we're going to take them on the second half of the episode, okay? So take this time on the chat and feel free. And then later on, I'll select them and place them on the screen. So Eric, following up on this notion that you have like this talent for math. It's also crazy. I think I've told you guys this before. Like this philosophy school that I've been visiting lately, philosophical materialism and political materialism from Spain, is that one of the main thinkers and writers of philosophical materialism says that everybody has to have another career before they study philosophy. And there's a lot of mathematicians in the school. Like a lot of guys are like heavy into analytic, theoretical mathematics and even applied math, which I think I agree with Victor. I'm super jealous because like the ability to make like heavy calculations accounting for several variables at the same time, and this notion of abstract thinking of like relating value to a certain number of variables and then correlating all those factors at the same time. I mean, that's super useful, and I think that is truly a remarkable talent when we trigger it back to philosophy, because you have to think, it almost triggers me this notion between the post-structuralism division between signifier and signified, and this notion that numbers or variables, they represent a value, as if the number is the sign and it represents a value, but then you have to be able to slide, as in a metaphor, the content of a variable, and then you have to rationalize and machine-like processing of the relationship between values. So Eric, and where do you see yourself more comfortable, in analytic philosophy, continental philosophy? Because we could argue that mathematics is probably closer to analytical philosophy, or am I wrong making that metaphor?
That's a complicated question. Yeah, we talked about that a bit last time too, about the having another area you're bringing to philosophy. Yeah, my experience of that is just being interdisciplinary means that you're always kind of moving between different areas, like I said, like history and psychology and literature and philosophy. So that's one way, not like a practical skill, I guess. If you learn how to analyze literature, then you might end up reading more history because you want to do a kind of historical analysis, what was going on at the time. You can look at the context of the production of literature, or you might look into psychology and analyze, I don't know, I read one article that was kind of analyzing the state of mind of Aeneas from Virgil's Aeneid. And his sort of developing this guilt complex over not protecting the city of Troy and stuff. It was quite convincing, actually, in the way that they. And there's been other studies about psychological trauma in Iliad and other epics, right? Is Achilles' anger a symptom of PTSD or something like that?
Oh yeah.
You're always going between these different. I
read some of
disciplines.
That book, actually. I know the book you're talking about. There's actually a book written by a historian, and also no, sorry, it's it might have been co-written by a historian and a a psychologist, and it was about analyzing the story, the Iliad and the Odyssey, and compare. I think it's called Homer in Vietnam, and it's comparing Vietnam War veterans, what they go through, and what characters in the Odyssey and Homer are describing as and maybe the anger is actually a symptom of PTSD, which they didn't really have a word for. And it's super interesting.
Losing all your friends on the front, right? That was Achilles and Patroclus had this sort of wartime relationship, right? They were really close friends, and when Patroclus died, Achilles went nuts, and so there's that, it was looking at that as a wartime kind of thing.
It's interesting because it kind of relates to what we were talking about, Eric, about the latest DSM-5, and also this notion from Bruno Latour about the death of Tutankhamun. And I think you guys read it, no? About Bruno Latour made this critique about Tutankhamun being dead because of tuberculosis. And the fact is that we came to that conclusion much later. So what did really kill Tutankhamun in that moment was probably a respiratory disease, and how we resignify what normality is and what exception is towards normality. And we find these new words to give meaning to these experiences in the world. And in that sense, I think literature, it's philosophical in the sense that it's through metaphor or through poetry that we first find these categories in a way to place human experience or human emotion or human behavior. I was researching because I was in a project called Bizarro in Spanish, and it was Baudelaire that changed the meaning of the word bizarre, because bizarre before Baudelaire, before the poetry of Evil Flowers, I don't know how to say it in English properly, but before that book of poetry from Baudelaire, the word bizarre was related to brave and forward coming. But then after Baudelaire, the word bizarre became strange, awkward, and hard to match. So it was with poetry that the meaning of the word was able to expand. So in that sense, I think literature is almost always like that. It's like they're trying to use words to convey new emotions and explain new ways of being in the world. So I think it makes sense with what Eric said. There's an intrinsic link between literature and philosophy, especially if we take into account the loose notion that the responsibility of philosophers is to create new concepts.
Yeah, I always find this sort of tension between literature, philosophy, and we mentioned mathematics before. It's kind of like polarity. And also you mentioned earlier, Diego, comparing analytic and continental philosophy, and I think that there's something in that distinction. I mean, I think that the both categories of continental and analytic are problematic for like a number of different reasons, obviously, and there's like a lot of overlap, but there's obviously a tendency for a kind of difference that I would say roughly maps on to some kind of a difference in like thinking styles, in which also map onto mathematics and literature in a way. I mean, it's not perfect, but I think there's something there that like continental philosophy, seems to be more literary, and analytic philosophy seems to be more, more mathematical, more logical in the certain narrow sense of the term.
Yeah.
But I think, one of the things that I sometimes have talked about with Matt McManus, who you've had on your show before, Diego, and used to also be on the Pillpod all the time, that it's kind of interesting the way some analytic philosophers try to write these like really rational arguments for why we should do X or Y, or like why, we can find logically an argument, premise 1, premise 2, premise 3 for why like slavery is wrong, or all these different things. But then it's like, what's actually going to move people, right? What's actually likely to change people's minds? And I think when you look at the history, things like literature, like, I don't know, To Kill a Mockingbird, for example, right? This book that it's read everywhere about the plight of, like someone in the American South, a black person in the American South, right? So like slavery, like literature that kind of speaks to the human experience in this kind of like more analog way, like not digital way, like as opposed to digital, right? Writes about like the kind of specificity of human experience, that somehow captures some specificity of human experience that like doesn't fit into kind of a digital mapping, to kind of use that analogy. And I think in a way continental philosophy is maybe somehow more awakened to this kind of like analog way of trying to describe the specificity of experience. And I think like, but then of course it can be frustrating because it can be so ambiguous that sometimes you can be like, what the fuck are you even talking about? But then the paradox is like, but that kind of stuff ends up moving people's emotions maybe in a way that will actually lead to meaningful change, potentially, right? I'm not saying that, I'm still going to be sympathetic to the materialist argument that's really the thing but there's something to this idea that like deep literature speaking to the human experience can cause people to change their mind about things in a way that like some analytic argument will never do to like someone who's not convinced, I think.
That's a great argument, Victor. I was discussing to a couple of, like most of my philosophy friends are either you guys from Canada and my other group of philosophy friends from Spain. And we were having a discussion a couple of weeks ago about which is more relevant to the currently existing situation. El Quijote from, the Quijote from Cervantes, or Marx. And it's kind of hard to argue, because I think like the Quijote from Cervantes is a masterpiece in a league of its own that is retroactively redefining a lot of what we understand about literature. But Marx itself, it's also paramount to understanding the current material conditions and whatnot. But it's the way you place it is interesting. And also when you were talking about the difference between analytic and continental, Lacan came to mind, because Lacan tried to use graphs and math in order, in a way, to fight against this ambiguity that he was so criticized for.
But he really added more ambiguity with those graphs.
Yeah, I agree. The graph of desires, like, dude, what the fuck were you smoking?
I was just going to say real quick, you mentioned Cervantes, just interesting fact, in my old department in political science at University of Toronto, there was actually a guy, I never read it, but he wrote his dissertation actually on Cervantes and political theory. And like Strauss, Leo Strauss and Cervantes, which is interesting. Anyway, I don't know if Eric.
Have you read Cervantes, Eric?
No. I'm unfortunately I have not focused on. It's kind of strange when I teach the earlier literature courses. We focus on like the French chanson de gestes and Dante and Chaucer, and but no, yeah, Cervantes kind of fell out. Just didn't read Don Quixote.
Don Quixote. We should give it a try at some point, because like there's a lot of very materialistic readings of Cervantes which are insane. You know, like one of my friends in Spain, he defends the thesis that Cervantes, it's a book against idealism. He says that El Quixote, it's the learning that idealism is stupid and a waste of time, because Quixote is all the time like putting ideas to practice and failing, because material reality does not correspond with idealism. It's There's a very, very cool reading from Cervantes. We should try to do something. But Eric, going back to your story, and at what point did you come like from literature into philosophy and then into semiotics and aesthetics?
I guess, yeah, I was trying to think about that earlier. When was like the moment that I got into philosophy? And probably, I guess, by way of critical theory, but because, you know, when you learn about literature and then you learn about the theories about literature, and that's when you start getting into the more philosophical, theoretical domain, right? So you're learning about psychoanalytic theories, structuralist theories, different kinds of formalisms like Russian formalism or like the new critical school. If you've learned some stuff about literature, you'll know what those kinds of movements are, different ways of reading literature at different historical periods. For example, the way you learn literature in at least in like North American high schools owes a lot to like the close reading strategies of the new critics. And yeah, these things actually do come from somewhere. But then when you're engaging with the theories, they often are, again, like engaging with philosophical questions and how they're worked out in literature, and through questions about language and symbolism and the relationship to the world. And those sorts of questions are always there. And it's the same, you know, even just go back to like Marx, right? The origin of critical theory in one way. And he's also deeply engaged with philosophy, but he's also, you know, using, I guess, mathematical methods and interested in natural science and interested in sort of vanilla philosophy like Hegel or Aristotle. You know, he's pulling from all these different fields. He's not making this disciplinarian thing. Now, if you go to economics, right, that's a specific discipline. Here's the people you read. Here's the proper method to apply. None of this exploratory nonsense. No talking about what Aristotle said about value, unless it's just like in the economics 101, kind of like Psych 101, where we mention Freud just to get past Freud as quickly as possible, right? The disciplinary institutions of these fields of thinking are problematic, right? They have this silo effect. They block them off from each other. And I don't know, that's a historical kind of development, just like the distinction between Continental and analytic philosophy is historical and cultural, right? Anglo-American philosophy, largely analytic, you know, influenced by the European continent and very interpretive and hermeneutic and focused on human experience and deeper questions, probably Continental. But you see differences even on both sides, right? Structuralism is very formalist in its methods, right? And it's very based on logic, right? Deductive logic and mathematical reasoning is like sort of built into their method. So, you know, you can't make these distinctions too absolute.
You could also say American pragmatism, that I know you're a fan of, Eric, is like, doesn't exactly fit in analytic, right? Either.
Yeah, and even within there, you know, Peirce was a logician and a mathematician. Dewey and William James couldn't have been more terrible at those things, right? So there's even, you know, William James is more interpretive and human experience centered. Peirce is more, I guess, quote unquote, objective, mathematical, logical. Yeah, yep. So there's differences all over the place. It's not so clear.
In your current field of study, like you finished your PhD, right?
Me, no, it's in progress.
Your PhD is in progress. And what is your current field of study?
Well, humanities. Yeah, that would be the name of the broader area. the big humanities on the side. I've always been interested in that sort of science humanities to culture split. That's maybe another way to put it. From the side of the humanities, I've always been interested in what's going on the other side of things.
And the title of your PhD?
Oh, the title is not hammered down yet, but it has to do with semiotics and ecology and literature.
Really? Semiology and ecology?
Yeah. It's a work in progress.
Can you give us a hint? Like, what direction is it taking, or what are you currently reading to fit into it?
Whew. For the last couple of days, I've actually been reading structuralism, Grammas and Todorov, and narratology, structural study of literature and myth and those sorts of things. We've gone over these things on the podcast before, like Claude Lévi-Strauss.
Yeah.
Because, if I want to apply Peirce to humanities topics, right, he doesn't have a lot to say in his writing about, literature, for example, culture, society. Like those are areas that weren't super well defined, I guess, in Peirce's time. Plus, he wasn't interested in literature primarily, and things like linguistics and stuff crop up more strongly after Peirce. So I need to read the structuralists to try and bridge my analysis between Peirce and humanities topics like literature and environmentalism, I guess you'd say.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think, where Eric is, he was just talking about his background in lots of kind of interdisciplinarity, right? So this kind of humanities program obviously fits that really well, because it's a interdisciplinary place where you don't have to be pigeonholed into one discipline, right? You can kind of draw on a lot of different things. So I think bringing in ecology, semiotics, all these different things, it makes sense in a program like that, where I think it would probably be a bit more difficult to do a project like that in let's say just a straight up philosophy department or
something
absolutely.
Like that. Absolutely. And those are the ones that are truly interesting, to be honest with you. Again, I don't know why. I swear it's completely coincidence. But another one of my Spanish friends that is a philosopher, he's a specialist in aesthetics. His first PhD was in aesthetics, and he's now working, and super ambitious. But he's probably one of the most famous Spanish-speaking philosophers in the world. He's working on a philosophical system called generic naturalism. But generic as in the sense of generation, of genesis, naturalismo genérico, but in the sense of how nature generates. And his philosophical system is mixing materialism, vitalism, a post-humanist ecologist reading, and it's really interesting because his field of specialty is aesthetics. At some point, if you can get a conversation with this guy, I think it's going to be really helpful to your PhD.
Who is that?
Yeah.
Can you name names here?
No, he's insanely intelligent. He's insane. His name is Ernesto Castro. He became very famous because he wrote a book about the philosophy of trap music.
A trap?
Oh, nice.
That's funny.
Yeah, no. The guy is in a league of his own. He's super good. And his father is one of the most famous art critics in the Spanish-speaking world. Also a philosopher. Yeah, at some point I'm gonna get you guys connected because it's a wonder to speak with him. So cool.
Yeah.
And at the moment, Eric, you're studying your PhD. You're also a professor.
Well, I was doing teaching assistant work, right? So not a professor exactly, but yeah, I'm looking to carry on with teaching, and this is more current event stuff, but with all the crazy stuff going on at universities in Canada right now, it seems I'm actually looking at teaching at the high school level while all that blows over, because it's a little bit terrible right now. Yeah.
Yeah, you have to be very patient to work with students again and again. So I was just broadly viewing the chat, and I think we already have a couple of interesting questions. I don't know what you guys think. We're already on a half an hour. Should we move on to some Q&A?
Yeah, I'm ready for it.
I'm
sure it'll bring up similar topics again, hopefully.
There's a couple of really interesting ones. I'm going to start with the generic ones, and then I'm going to move to the ones with the current events. But I think you two are more than okay with this. I know Victor is a big fan of existentialism. So how do we deal with the rock from Sisyphus?
I don't know. Do you want to go first, Eric?
Embrace happiness in a world without inherent meaning. Yeah, that's the existentialist point of view there. Yeah. One of the problems with being interdisciplinary is you're going to find a lot of gaps in your knowledge, and existentialism for me is one of those gaps, which was why I was so happy to read Sartre finally. And I don't know that I was reading a little bit on the difference between Sartre and Camus as well, and I think Camus focuses more on that absurd element of trying to find meaning in a meaningless world is kind of like an absurd search. And for Sartre, it's more like humans invest the world with meaning in accordance with their projects that they project onto the world. And so I guess that's the answer is somewhere in there about embracing happiness. If that's your project, if that's your project in life, is to be, content. That's often parents have that sort of talk with their kids. It's like, all I want for you in life is to just be happy and content. You can be famous, you can be rich, you can be whatever else, successful, but being content is the important thing. Right. So that they're trying to get you to think about that as being part of your life project, I guess. And so we have to maybe accept or reject that as part of our, it's a decision you have to make. I don't know if I gave a good existentialist answer there.
But I think also from your own experience too, but I guess I would say my reaction to that question is to sort of question some of the underlying assumptions. So I think, happiness, is that really the target? I guess, is that really the target in this world? I guess to some extent, we don't want to be unhappy. We don't want to be miserable. But on the other hand, I would say that being happy all the time doesn't exactly seem like the target for what seems to me to be a very satisfying life. I feel like a satisfying life has a lot of contrast, has a lot of challenges that you has projects. I mean, I think Eric's right that it's about the project that you decide to pursue. And I think that I think that sometimes in pursuit of that project, there can be quite a tremendous amount of things that we would probably call unhappiness and struggle. And I think that that's the thing that makes me want to get up each morning, right? Is something like that. Now, I will say that I do feel blessed in a sense that I tend to have a pretty content disposition. But I don't think that that's enough. I don't think that that's the thing that you really want. And then I guess the other part of the question that I would want to maybe question the kind of assumption is it's always been interesting to me. And this probably comes from the fact that I was raised as an atheist. My parents were not religious. But this thing about there being no kind of objective or inherent meaning. And I guess first, I've always found that to be what does that even mean? Right? What does it mean for the world to have no inherent objective meaning? What would that look like? Does that look like a man in the sky who looks and cares about us? I guess, is that really what it is? And I guess I just don't know why that makes a difference to me. So either he's there and he's cares about us, but then there's all these things that seem horrible in the world. So I don't know, that just creates a whole new set of puzzling questions to me. But then okay, if we're going to set aside the question of some personal God in the world who cares about us, then there's also to me a very puzzling question about what does it mean for the world to have objective significance? And why would that make a difference? I guess I don't understand that. I don't know what that is. So I just find that so I mean, I've always had trouble with that. Again, that might be my atheistic handicap that I just I don't where I came from, where that to me, because I feel probably to people who grew up religious, it's just incredible. It would be very strange for me to even ask that question, maybe why would that be a thing? But
I think from being in humanities and culture studies type stuff and learning about post-structuralism and post-humanism and all. That questioning of that human nature distinction I wasn't so strong during the existentialist period, right? Like what like post-structuralism, like it pointed out how structuralism, like Gramsci, had the nature culture distinction kind of at its center, right? Like even built into their model of the sign in a way, right? Like the signifier is the perceptible elements, and the signified is the intellectual side, and so that immediately puts this external internal division there, and then maps a lot of other things on humans and nature, or humans and non-humans. Questioning those fundamental assumptions are like, okay, so I guess if there's dinosaur fossils in the world, that there's something that could be meaningful without human beings being present, right? Because that points to something that used to be, but no other animals other than humans are interested in the ancient history of the world. So you have a problem there where it's like, well, I guess some other species could theoretically come up with their own archaeology and paleontology, but we haven't seen that happen yet. So I guess we're still stuck with the anthropocentric view.
I wrote a piece for the postdoctorate I'm doing right now about the world history of Mexico based on the point of view of rivers, like how rivers see the development of geography, and it's strange when we decentralize from. And actually, I was just reading what Eric was talking about in Derrida from grammatology, where he deconstructs this dichotomy between human, like nature and culture, and again, it leads all the way back to hierarchical and logos. It's very traceable how we're still very logocentric when we make these distinctions, But I also think that the idea of not having inherent meaning give us a lot of freedom. Like when people say, like, I was listening to Victor, it would be a pity to wake up or being born and then you're just like handed a script and this is what you're supposed to do. This is absolute right. This is absolute wrong. And then what? Where's freedom in a world where meaning is inherent? Like I'd much rather live in a world of chaos where meaning needs to be constructed, and that gives me so much freedom. Even if I'm materially not free, I'm meaningfully more free to signify with the things that are happening to me. So I don't know. I do agree. We have to find Sisyphus happy at the end of the day.
I wanted to actually add one thing about freedom there, because I think that's also an interesting kind of puzzle. Is like people often say, oh, it's so horrible that we don't have free will. But I often kind of make a similar point where I say, well, what would absolute freedom look like? And then I think this might even be in Nietzsche. Like, imagine having to decide every thought that enters your mind, right? Imagine like you were like, I'm going to decide that this thought enters my mind, right? Every time. That would be horrible, but that would be freedom because you'd control everything.
Even the stimuli,
So then the question is, well, then what is it that we really want when we talk about freedom, right? Like, because we don't want that kind of freedom where we're deciding. And I think there's something kind of similar when like we try to describe, well, what would like objective meaning be? It's just like not clear what that even is. And it's like, it's not clear what freedom would be exactly, because it's nice to have thoughts just flow into my mind. I don't want to have to decide every thought that comes into my mind. That would be a nightmare. I don't know. It's just, or it would also just make no sense too.
I was just reading, I might not phrase this totally right, but Gramsci was talking about the two types of constraints that are around meaning making. And one of them is the rules of language, right? Which put these negative conditions. They're not positively meaningful, but when you're using language, you have to follow grammatical and syntactic rules and stuff. So that's one kind of restraint. And the other restraint comes from context, right? So habits, right? We form in the context of our lives, and those appear in language as repetition. And so what he says is between these two constraints, we have this situation that Lacan described as the danger of absolute freedom, no rules, which results in a situation of non-meaning, right? Because if we have no rules,
There's no
in
meaning.
common, then we won't be able to understand each other. And on the other hand, the complete repetition, like the complete determination of communication by social convention, where it's just totally non-meaningful as well, because communication just consists of repetition of these rules and patterns over and over and over again, and you have absolutely like no freedom in that situation. So it's like we're hemmed in on both sides by these two extremes of meaninglessness, of complete freedom or total social determination and compulsion.
Yeah, if I understand what you try to say is like we are limited by language in a way to construct meaning, but on the other hand is the fact that things are different from each other and that language cannot encompass everything that meaning emerges. Because in a way, if you were able to, like Victor said, if we were able to take in all stimuli simultaneously at the same time about everything, no meaning will be possible. But because no meaning will be needed. Meaning is needed as insofar because we are unable to take everything into account. So we need to limit. We need to in a way, create the borders, the borderlines within concepts, because we are not able to take everything into account. Because we take some things into account and others we cannot, or maybe we cannot even distinguish, then meaning has to emerge in a way.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, you always have to look at the constraints are also enabling of something else, right? Like freedom is always relative to some set of constraints that.
Yeah.
But I don't know how the story goes with existentialism with.
Let's give Camus a rest, because there's other questions waiting for us in line, and I think this one is probably going to be interesting. Vic, do you mind reading the question?
That's for Diego.
Diego, is it true that Trump is histrionic?
What do you think?
From the Orange Man Productions, by the way. I want to add the name.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah. What do you think?
Oh my God, I thought, histrionic meaning like dramatic or theatrical. Does it have a more specific meaning? Does histrionic have a psychoanalytic meaning too?
I wasn't sure about that also.
So how would you give a reading on Trump's current psychological behavior? You think he's neurotypical? Like is he neurotic? I don't know if Trump will fit under neurosis.
I mean, he's some kind of narcissist, probably.
Probably.
Like clinical narcissist, probably, because he wants to be. He's so insecure that he's always trying to like pretend that everyone loves him, and I don't know. He's also, I mean, he's definitely dramatic, and he's making a big scene. Apparently, I just saw that he said the stock market, the globalists are behind the stock market plunges right now.
Oh my God! Yes.
And I know. Apparently, he did also breaking news. He did lift the tariffs on Canada as well just now. So.
Really? Just now during this conversation?
During this conversation, yeah.
He's such a bluffer, man.
He's all over the place, eh?
Yeah. He's always bluffing. It's so hard to follow.
Those things are probably having a real impact. That's the point. But yeah, I'm kind of familiar with all the news diagnoses, right? Like, yeah, he's a narcissist or an egotist, or according to Jordan Peterson, he's too empathetic. He's
too empathetic.
He's just a man with a heart of gold in an evil world, or some whatever weird shit. I don't know. Oh, short of being able to study him firsthand or know him personally, all you can really do is just look at all these different interpretations of his behavior around him, and try to figure out what that says, at least about the times and how we regard people, right? I guess 100 years ago, something he would have either been possessed by the devil or sent by God to chase the devil away.
one of the two. What do you guys thought about the episode with Zelensky in the Oval Office?
Oh yeah, that was really something. I kind of liked Jon Stewart's analysis. I saw, I don't know if on the Daily Show on Monday, he sort of said he was like clips of different people being like, I just don't understand what the strategy is here with Ukraine. Like, I just don't get it. Like, why are you? And John Stewart and I kind of believe this a little bit. He's like, you get what's there to get? It's like these Trump Republicans like Putin more than they like Zelensky. They like, and then it's like, they talk about Western values. It's like, well, when many people think about Western, we've talked about how weird and ambiguous that term is, but he kind of says, a lot of the time people think in Europe and North that like Western values is this idea of like these Enlightenment figures, right? Like Locke and Rousseau and Voltaire, like these new things. But like when mega Trump Republicans think about like Western civilization, they're thinking about the Knights Templar. They're thinking about like, that's the Western civilization they want back. Right, they want the Western civilization, and he kind of shows a clip of Marjorie Taylor Greene talking about how how like Putin's not attacking other Christians, only Zelensky's attacking other Christians, right? And it's like, so there is like a bit of a weird narrative where I do think that like MAGA likes, they see Putin as anti-woke, and they're obsessed with wokeness. They're obsessed with like Western civilization becoming too woke, and really they just see like I think they see Putin as a defender of their kind of Western civilization. That's at least John Stewart's analysis, and I thought that there was something to it.
Eric,
maybe you hard disagree.
No, yeah, I can't say for sure, but I think that clarification of referring to the spectacle definitely helps. As I think Trump is definitely. I mean, these tariffs are histrionic through and through, right? Like, it seems like they never really meant for them to stick or even happen, right? Like the first time he did it, and then it was delayed, and now that delay is up, and it's been, I don't know, delayed or lifted again. Like, clearly the whole point is just to get the reaction. The whole thing is the spectacle. That's the point of the tariffs, is just to stir shit up and create a spectacle, right? And Trump has this calculative, reflective relationship to his optics, right? He's approaching it like ironically. He's not like, worried like from a PR sense how he comes across to people. He's like exploiting how he comes across to people in order to further his own goals. So he's completely just, he's like detached from the spectacle in a way, so he can manipulate the spectacle. If that makes any sense. He's a manipulator. He puts out that image, just like the strong men in politics, right? Like a strong man is a completely redundant figure in politics. Who gives a shit about how much they can bench or whether they ride horses or not? But like, that's the image, right? You put the image out there and you manipulate the discourse that's going on right now, which is, I guess, we still have our democratic liberal consensus, but now that's being challenged.
Yeah, I agree that the spectacle helped us respond to that first question, because I think it's almost as if Trump understands that being the president of the United States makes his ludicrous statements gain some sense of validity, that they have to be taken seriously. Like, it's something that if he would say from any other position, people would just immediately dismiss him as an idiot, and that's it. But because he's the president of the United States, people have to take him seriously. But he's still behaving like a parroting buffoon, like saying the most insane statements and then seeing how people react. And he judges the reactions, and then he acts based on the reactions. But this tariff game, it's already taking a toll. Like, the market is crashing. Like, people are making economic decisions, even if he hasn't imposed positively any tariffs yet. Like, the conversation about tariffs right now are just normative. They're not positive. They haven't been imposed in a way, but they already like producing effects in the real world. So I think Trump is like taking advantage of this like hyper reality, like where his discourse and his spectacle being is more real than real. Like, talking about tariffs, not imposing them, talking about tariffs, crash markets. He's like overdriving the animism of the market, like this notion that the market has a soul and has an anima, has a life force that flows and manifests because of the intentions of individuals acting on a free market. It's almost like Trump is like manipulating that energy. Like, I know it sounds very mystic, but he's manipulating all this in a direction, but he's always like measuring the temperature of the waters. Like, I'm going to impose tariffs, but then I have a good conversation with Claudia, and I'm going to wait a month. And I'm going to just stay with Macron, and then you guys take away alcohol and American products from the shelves, so I'm going to wait another month. But like already it's as if the fake out is doing more effect than the act.
I just don't know if it's the effect that he wants, but yeah, I agree with you. I mean, I think that is how he operates. I also think that, this is something his supporters say all the time, and I mostly think it's used as like a stupid excuse, but he's a deal maker or whatever. And but I do think that what's true about that is probably when he was in his private business, he probably did stuff like this. But the thing is, when you did stuff like this, when you're just negotiating behind the scenes with some other corporation, it doesn't matter that much, because it just scares the other person or the other group, but it doesn't have these broader geopolitical or broader global economic implications, right? And I think that that's one of the things that I think why his tactics don't work that well as president, because it's you make some crazy threat in this context and the whole world goes crazy, right? But if you make a threat like that when you're just negotiating with some other real estate guy, it's that guy's God, this guy's out of his mind, but okay, maybe we should give him what he wants because we're scared. And it's that maybe could sometimes work. I mean, I will say he has seemed to successfully have gotten pretty much most of NATO to start saying we're going to start paying 2% of our GDP towards defense, which before no one, that was never happening before, and now it seems to be working. Canada's talking about it. Canada has a plan to do it now. I think most European countries, I mean, Europe is also just shit, we need to also have our own defense here, because we can't rely on the United States to do that anymore. And you're right, it's having all these other effects, even though the tariffs haven't been in effect. I mean, in Canada, we're seeing a lot of decisions being made that that they today, I think they announced that they're loosening restrictions across provinces in Canada, because before there used to be some kind of dumb barriers, even for alcohol sales. They have a big, in Ontario, we have kind of shitty wine region, but we have a wine region where they make wine. And then there's also probably a better wine region in British Columbia on the West Coast. But for some reason in Ontario, we never were allowed to buy British Columbia wine because we were protectionist for Ontario. So now now they're actually breaking down all those barriers, and they're okay, well, now BC wine can come to Ontario. So and then and I was thinking about stuff like the pipeline, like a cross Canada pipeline. I mean, in a way, I was kind of God, maybe it would have been a good idea to have a pipeline to the East Coast, because then we could sell our oil to Europe instead of the US. I mean, I'm not saying I'm obviously oil. I mean, I'm obviously against, it being a long-term solution, but for strategic reasons, I'm just fuck, we kind of got caught with our pants down here now. I don't know.
Yeah.
Well, the two most intertwined economies in the world having a falling out is going to be crazy.
Yeah.
But, I think this is something I read in Felix Guattari, Deleuze's writing partner. In his solo work later, I think this was in the Three Ecologies he wrote about. It was just a line I remember him saying, being the economy isn't some separate domain, right? It's plugged into everybody's nervous system in a way. So our reactions directly affect the economy. And you can see that exactly on something like Twitter. When Trump tweets, the economy immediately responds. But certain areas go up, certain areas go down, right? It's exactly the same thing. Defenders of Trump also say, he doesn't mean it. He doesn't mean when he says this, or, Elon Musk doesn't mean it when he gives the Nazi salute on stage. He's just got autism or something like that. People use this, they didn't mean it defense, which is just frustrating, because you can just say that about anybody you like to defend them.
Yeah, you can say it when it's convenient.
Again, the whole point is the spectacle. Who cares whether he really intended to put tariffs or not? The whole point was to just say that and get the reaction. And then you can decide what to do later. That was the point. The point of tweeting something negative isn't to express their opinion about this. It's to make a real effect. It's to tank one area of the economy, right? If they said, electric cars are shit, don't buy them, they'll never say that because Trump and Musk have a close working relationship right now. If Trump wants to fire Musk, he'll just tweet something like that out, and then we'll know that the Doge is being reassigned.
Didn't Musk really piss off? Didn't he really piss off some? Was it a Mexican billionaire, Carlos Slim, or is that Brazil?
Carlos Slim is the Mexican guy. Yeah.
Yeah, he pissed him off a lot, and then I think he canceled his $7 billion contract.
Yeah, investment in Mexico. I was going to ask, do you guys think there's any truth to this rumor that Trump wants to get away from NATO and wants to remove the U.S. from NATO?
I mean, I think it's true that he says that. I don't know. It's so hard to predict whether he actually thinks that, but like he's been saying it. I mean, and I think maybe the better question is like, would that be a good thing? I think, I'm more of a globalist shill than you are. I'm more of a globalist liberal shill. So I think that would be horrible. I think that's a bad thing. But like, Diego, you might be a little bit more sympathetic to that outcome happening. So yeah, exactly. So, but I think,
we'll get there. We'll get there.
Do I think it? I think Trump has a lot of ideas that he. Another thing is I feel like he's just trying things to just see what'll happen, like you said before, Diego. And but some of the things he's going to be stopped from doing, and I don't know. I mean, I guess there's a bigger question: is like what is in the American interest, right? Like if you really think about it, and I guess like a lot of protectionists in America, a lot of Trump supporters were like, why are we paying for all this stuff? And there's a logic to that. Yeah, like why are they paying for all that stuff? But I think what they're missing is like it actually benefits America to be like the world police, to be like I think there's actually like an upside for them to remain that way. So
absolutely, they have been abusing this position of being the world police for like centuries now. So yeah, absolutely. I don't know. Like I think, for example, like connecting this back to this encounter with Zelensky in the Global Office. I still believe that Trump's strategy is to, in a way, befriend Putin in order to get him away from China. But I don't think that's no longer possible. Like, I don't think the relationship between Putin and Xi Jinping it's breakable now. I think their bond is like too deep. Like the economies are growing together. Last time I was in Kazan, in the south of Russia, in the BRICS encounter, they took me to these insanely humongous warehouses and industrial areas completely designed for the trade between China and Russia. Like I don't think the economies of China and Russia can be unintertwined in the next centuries, in the next 2 centuries. And I think what Trump is trying to do now is to find this leverage and try to flirt with Putin to become another economy that is closer to the US. And even if he has to lose Europe in the process and Canada in the process and Mexico in the process, he's probably be willing to trade. But I don't think it's going to work. As an economical strategy, I don't think he has any potential.
Yeah, he does. He does seem. Go ahead, Eric. Sorry.
I was just going to say that America First has this kind of ambiguity to it, right? Because we see Trump being kind of protectionist towards America, right? So it kind of America First could mean isolationism, or America First could be, America on top of the global order, hegemonic. So, I don't think it makes a difference really getting out of NATO versus just completely dominating NATO and being able to dictate what the other countries do, and America can choose whether or not to do any of that, right? So it's kind of ambiguous. I think it could go either way. If NATO becomes very pliant and just collapses to all of Trump's demands, like American news organizations are currently doing, then maybe there won't be a problem, right? And it'll just become a appendage of American empire. I don't know. I guess ever since the British Empire passed the torch of global superpower to America, and now we're seeing another slide from that position, but with some ambiguity as to who's going to be next. Is it going to be a unified bloc of Europe, or is it going to be some kind of BRICS alliance filling that place? It's hard to say, and obviously nobody knows.
Yeah, a lot of geopolitical analysts. A lot of geopolitical analysts are already calling it the tripolar world, like saying that especially right now with Trump, it's almost like as if Trump understood that he can no longer strongman China and Russia out of the of global hegemon, so he has to share it. And at the moment, what we're seeing is those three powers, like almost like dividing the world and economic relationships in between them.
I mean, I don't really see. I personally don't really see Russia though as like an actual force. Like, I mean, they're doing stuff. They just have a lot of nukes, but I don't think the economy is like really that impressive. Whereas China, I think, is a real force. I mean, China is obviously like a real force. So I don't know. I mean, but I guess. I mean, it's interesting your analysis there, Diego, that maybe Trump's trying to cozy up, because I know Trump has always been anti-China. Like, I mean, even before he was running for president, he's always been like worried about China.
Yeah.
He's always had a thing against China. So I think, so like, I mean, that's interesting. I mean, it kind of makes sense that like, trying to get Russia to like stop being cozy with China could be like in some kind of grand plan against China. But I mean, you know, if you end up alienating all of Europe and Canada and Mexico, like, I don't know if it's even worth it, but like, so I'm not sure, but it's interesting. I hadn't exactly thought about it that way.
Yeah, it's a difficult issue too, because to what extent can we even talk about national economies, like Russia having a weak economy and America having a strong one? Like, it's all globally intertwined to such an insane degree that, you know, it almost is useless to just divide them by national economies now. But you know, when Stuart Hall, a culture studies figure associated with British Marxism from the 70s, was writing and contributing to culture studies and analyses of race and racism and things like that, right? His context he was talking about is kind of the decline of the British Empire, right? Where the world was in this relationship where you had the dominating force, the colonial power, and the colonies, right? And after decolonization occurred, right, and we all started to claim we're these liberal democracies, right, you can't have these closed borders anymore. So what he's saying is, you know, now the empire is coming home to roost, right? Like, all the former colonial subjects are now free to move to the motherland, right? And this creates this well, he analyzes, I guess, culturally, how the racial tensions that this creates and transforms, right? You see the same thing in the States too, right? Like, all say immigration, people want to immigrate to the States, and they frame it as some kind of invasion. But, you know, we know that from a global perspective, right, America is involved in the reason that these people are moving, right? But we still have this nationalist blinders where we look at national economies and every nation is a subject and the source of action. No other nation can make another nation do something, clearly. But no, we know that's crazy.
I think nothing more perfect for a closing statement to know Eric than Eric opening up like 10 new lines of sight as his last comment in the podcast. For you guys that are not familiar with Eric, he's like the specialist in bringing up like super interesting points at the top of the hour. Like, at the top of the hour is going to be like, oh my God, there's like 10 new things I want to talk about. Yeah. But
the reality that it's coming to an end just hits me so hard. I'm like, oh, I got to get everything out.
Then suddenly, like, everywhere. But
and then I find things in there I didn't even know were in there.
Yeah. But as a closing exercise, I would like to invite you guys to recommend your favorite episode from the Pillpod that you have participated in the last 200. Like, for the new listeners, like, since you guys are going to go from this episode to our channel in YouTube and look at the memorabilia of all the former episodes, can you, Eric and Victor, recommend one of your favorites? Which one would you recommend?
Oh, our interview with Paul Reiter is probably going to be one of the hits I was predicting. So yeah, I would check out that one. Put that on the candidate list.
So the interview with Paul.
That's recent, though.
Yeah, that's a recent one. A couple of weeks ago.
A classic one. Oh shoot, yeah, classic ones. I always like to point out our Fanon episode when I made that prediction in it, but maybe I won't.
The Fanon one is a jewel, like, super good. I remember it. Yeah, it's super good. Vic?
That's a good one too.
We have some good Jordan Peterson episodes, I think, that I enjoyed. Like, I think we did. We did one way back at Pill's house where we did it in person, and like we have a video of it. It's like a video episode on YouTube, and I think Victor Hyanaju is there, and like Lit Vic, that is, and
even Matt is not in that episode as well.
No, I think Matt is in that episode, actually. I think.
Yeah, I think so as well.
I think
the one about Jordan Peterson is super good. And
That's
if I can recommend one, I think there's a fight night between Derrida and
Foucault, probably.
Yeah, I think Derrida and Foucault in a fight night. That one is super good as well. Highly recommended.
Of fight nights, I guess I love controversy. I think that like maybe my favorite. Maybe my favorite controversial episode.
This is my cue to live. Like this is reality invading my content creation. So guys, thank you so much for the conversation today. For everyone that joined in the chat, thank you guys so much. Leave the comments as always. We'll take care of them later.
I was just gonna say the Zizek episode that we did where it got really heated and we argued with each other. I was just gonna say that really quickly.
The one that Zizek is arguing against trans rights.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't say he's arguing. Well, that's what the controversy was about, but I didn't agree that that's what he was doing. So that one
is very, very good.
You want to see us
really angry? That one is very good. Yeah.
If you want to see Pills getting angry at us, go listen to
see us at our best.
Anyway, sorry, I don't want to keep you from your son over there.
No, don't worry. So guys, thank you so much for this. It was a pleasure as always. For everybody listening, remember we have a channel in YouTube for the Pillpod. You can go there and check all these episodes like the ones we recommended. And nos vemos la próxima semana. See you guys very soon. Bye bye.